Well, why don't we get started? If more show up, more show up. First off, Peg and I really welcome you and so glad you're here. We're a little smaller, but small but mighty, and sometimes I have found that the smaller groups are, where the rubber meets the road and all that. Peg, why don't you want to lead us in prayer?
Sure, Rick. I'm happy to. Let's gently close our eyes. Relax our shoulders, our neck. Take a deep breath in. Release. And become still. Dear loving Spirit, which embraces us all, may we be led tonight into evolving thoughts and awareness that help us to clarify the true law of attraction and to realize that what we emit is what we attract. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Peg. Law of attraction, wow. Let me start off with some words from Lieberman. On page 115, Dr. Lieberman writes, "We must realize that whatever we identify with is what is real for us. If we identify with the habitual chatter, worry, and concerns of the conscious mind, then that becomes our reality and what occupies our life. If, however, we realize that we are actually the silent, peaceful witness, then that becomes our reality and life takes on a different flavor." I think he hits the nail on the head, if I can find it. On page 118, he says, "This is the law of attraction. What we admit is what we attract, and what we attract is what we need, but not necessarily what we want or desire." Let me repeat that. This is the true law of attraction. What we admit is what we attract, and what we attract is what we need, but not necessarily what we want or desire. Let me get to he has a wonderful quote from Rumi on page 123. Rumi tells us, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The wound is the place where the light enters you. I always remember, it was back in the 1970s, and back then psychiatrists, and Dr. Namro really was a psychiatrist. Nowadays, I'm glad I'm not a psychiatrist. You see a patient for 10 minutes. It tends to be you see a patient for 10 minutes and you give them a prescription, and then it's now serving, and it's like a bakery now serving, and the next one comes. But I had the therapeutic hours with Dr. Namro, but I always thought that the box of Kleenex in the office was for other people. And the day I realized, and I broke down, really started crying and all that. And it was over the weirdest thing. How this works unplanned. But once I that the box of Kleenex was there for me, the wound, and it happened over the weirdest thing. You wouldn't have thought this was was going to break down the guard and all that. I got a letter from living in Northern Virginia. And I got a letter from the local judicial system saying it's your turn to serve on jury duty. And so I came in and talked and said, I might not be, I have jury duty and they've called me. And Dr. Namro said, well, and father had died when I was 17 years old. And he said to me, well, I can write a letter and get you out of jury duty. And I said, well, no, I don't know if that's the ethical thing to do. And my father would have, and talked about still, hero worshiping the dead father and all that. And one thing, and he asked a few questions, and the next thing you know, the tears were, gushing out, and it was then, from then on that I was able to share, hero worship, but I also had a lot of other thoughts concerning my father, which, um, and it's interesting, I had projected almost all of that onto Ernest Hemingway. You killed yourself. That Ernest you fraud, you were presented yourself to the world as macho man and everything else like that. And when you thought your powers of writing were leaving you, instead of dealing with it, you took a gun and killed you. So then I could start to see, what I was projecting on Ernest Hemingway was more or less dealing with, own. And so I do believe that the wound is where the light gets in. Reverend Deborah and Patty have written a wonderful guide. I don't know if you've seen it, but called "Living Your Light," and for people running running faith and action circles, and it's really designed to kick discussion off. But some of the things which they explain what Lieberman means when he talks about the true law of attraction. I think, when we're talking about it. And he says, the next one is, or sub one on that, is how does crisis lead to opportunity? How does crisis lead to opportunity? And then wherever we go, experiences occur over and over. So you leave Virginia and come to Sacramento, but, wherever you go, there you are. And then why do we attract these events? Also, another question which really got to me is how can we benefit from facing the difficult people and situations in our lives? A lot of people have said this, but there's the Book of Joy, which was sort of co-written by both the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it was one of theirs, 80th birthday, and Desmond Tutu came to India to celebrate with Dalai Lama, and their weekend was really about joy. And the Dalai Lama made some really telling about sometimes the people who really rub you raw can be your best teachers. Can really be, and so ironically be thankful for those difficult ones. And the analogy which I love thinking about is the oyster, which a piece of grit or sand gets into the oyster, and the oyster's pushing to try, it's uncomfy, and is pushing to try to get that grit or whatever out of the oyster shell, and all that pressure and stuff like that leads to a pearl. And then that leads me to think of where Jesus talked about the pearl of great price. And so I'm going to ask, I'll ask Peg after this, but if I hope we can share about these experiences, about the law of attraction again, that Lieberman's talking about. We put out a lot, and we attract toward the universe, from the universe, and a lot of times it's what's good for us, but it's boy, oh boy, if we were writing the script, we would have written winning the lottery, and what's coming to mind, it was one of the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, and if you remember, well, I don't know if you, had young kids at the time. So of course, there's a beautiful young woman who becomes sort of like the older sister to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so the first time she sees the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, she starts screaming, and then they, well, no, we're not gonna, because they had baseball bats and all that. I keep getting, and we're not gonna hurt you and all that. And she looks up and says, "I must be dreaming. Why can't I have dreams of Harrison Ford? You know, so, why do I have to have dreams of this? You know." So
Mm.
in my particular case, I had a different. My mother was. My mother might not have always been right, but she sure as heck was never wrong. And I must say I am fortunate I was her son, not her daughter. I think if I had been her daughter, it would have you magnify it by 50 million volts or whatever. But it was difficult, and she could be. I mean, I realize she, without going into a lot of detail, being my mom was not an easy. It was not an easy road to, both in terms of childhood for various reasons, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and also it was an era. She wanted to go outside the house and work, but in the mores of that time among our social class, my God, the husband should be, providing, and it was, and finally, we needed more money to keep the house and everything, and so she went out and started working as a legal secretary and was very good at it. But if it were this a day and age, she would have gone to law. I mean, she would have gone to law school, and so there was that. But anyway, I kept that really hard charging, aggressive. I kept on attracting that into my life. Um, did one with, and Lieberman again. I shared on it Sunday. Lieberman did the same thing. He had only, in terms, it was his father, uh, and he in essence said that he married his father wearing a dress, and the divorce was very very difficult and all that. But so I mean, he hadn't resolved the issues. He hadn't resolved the issues with his father. So I did face went out, and I was. People said to me, "This is you need you, Rick. You can do what you want, obviously, but my advice is that you need somebody who's warm and is willing to give you warm fuzzies, and you have chosen, this is not for you. However, uh, the marriage, this it looked so good in terms of, my mother said, and my father had been died then, so it was my uncle Larry, who was quasi father. Both of them said, you would be an idiot, to walk away. Attractive. She's a lawyer. She's going to be obviously be made partner in one of America's leading law firms. You guys will have it made. You're lucky. She even wants you, and all that. And so, under that, and it's interesting if you look at pictures of my wedding. You can see the tension. You honestly can see the tension on my face, and knowing that probably was not the wisest idea or whatever. So fast forward, I'm now chief economist and vice president of research at United Way, which largest charity in the world and all that. I am working for again. Oh, if you've ever seen The Devil Wears, remember Meryl Streep, The Devil Wears Prada. Essentially, I was working for a woman named Cynthia Round, who was my boss, who headed up branding, marketing, and she'd come to us from. Well, she rose very high in Procter and Gamble. I mean, and in those those days, it's a little less now, but in those days, I mean, in terms of marketing and market research, Procter and Gamble was seen, I mean, as the Harvard of or the Stanford University of marketing. I mean, anybody who could take something as common as a bar of soap and turn it into and dishwashing soap and turn it into branded products where people are willing to pay $2 more what they could. I mean, that takes real marketing. And I remember she was responsible for Mr. Clean. And I remember one time I walked up to her and I asked, what is Mr. Clean's first name? And the look on her face was like I had called her mother, that she was, her mother came from, or had a questionable life or something. She looked at me and said, his name is Mr. Clean. I mean, it just so so. But I learned so much from her. She was so good. But when she called me to her office, I always felt she was going to say, look in the courtyard. We're building a guillotine. We're not going to use it on you today, but if you don't shape up by July, the tumble card is coming for, will come and get you. So, but that same, that, those same types of qualities, and it really struck me. Why is this this type of person, this archetype, keep on going in? And again, one of the key things which struck me is because I keep on looking to mommy. I keep on looking to this dominant queen-like figure to say, to bow. I dub you. You are now Sir Richard. And to realizing that knighting comes, as it were, from the Christ within, from that spiritual connection. And once I started doing that and faced up to that, that type of person has honestly not been in my life. So I identify with what Lieberman is saying in the law of attraction, that ironically, I wouldn't have chosen to have those characters in my life, but it really helped me. I mean, I sometimes even wonder, would I have been so interested in spirit if I had had such a wonderful relationship with my parents and all that? Would I have been interested in spirituality as much as I? So the irony is sometimes these things which we look at, you think, oh my God, this was really difficult, this is horrible, or whatever. The Apostle Paul in Romans, the 8th chapter, the 28th verse, says, all things work together for good for those who know and love God. That some of these things which, ironically, we might look at as, but it led to real growth. I'm not so sure I would have been as open to Unity's message if, a lot of us don't come into Unity on a roll, to put it mildly. But being in that, you're able to see these changes are necessary, and then making those changes. And as we start putting out different vibes to the universe, I think we start attracting a different clientele into your life. So, having said that, Peg, and different clientele, do you have an example of sort of the law of attraction where you were attracting something which ironically wasn't so great, but it really moved you along, as it were?
Probably a lot like that, actually. I was just making some notes in the chapter today, and I wrote the word avoid because on page 121, he talks about what he calls human homeopathy. And it's like he says the same substance that causes our symptoms is the one that ultimately is part of the cure. And that we try to avoid, he calls it allergic reaction to certain types of people and experiences. We try to avoid these things or people, but but then we find that they become part of the cure for us because we are looking deeper. If we're trying to be aware, oops, I'm off screen somehow. I can't get beyond. Okay. Yeah. He talks about how dis-ease can become the foundation for disease. And the answer is not avoidance. He says it's gently embracing the situation or person until you're able to naturally accept its therapeutic value. And I think that's really hard because we really want to avoid unpleasant situations and people that we think are unpleasant. But he says, no, ultimately, it becomes the strength. The more we can face these obstacles, the stronger it gets. And he says, what triggers you transforms you. And I think that's a very strong statement. And I think that probably people here in our group tonight can probably relate to that and have examples of their own. That what triggers you, you know, transforms you. So I'd like to hear from other people about things in your life that have triggered you and ultimately transformed you.
Mm. Yeah, go one past the.
Talking, as you were talking about what you had found out about who you attracted, made me remember that, well, a short story. When I was 5 years old, my father, who was an alcoholic, got in an accident and was thrown through the windshield and broke his leg and lost an eye. And I, at 5, he was supposed to bring shoes back to me, and I was very excited about these shoes because he owned a shoe store. And my mother turned to me when I was asking about my shoes and said, "Don't you know your father was in an accident? He's in the hospital. Why are you asking about your shoes?" I'm just telling that story quickly because after breaking up with a man who was the second relationship out of 3 main relationships I've had in my life, I actually heard a voice. And I've heard this voice maybe 5 or 6 times during my life, and it said, "You are not responsible for your father's accident." Because at 5, I thought, because of the way my mom responded, that I caused his accident. And I kept picking relationships where, and the voice another time told me, "You are enough." But I didn't think I was enough, so I only asked for relationships that really, after the second or third time, I wanted to break up with the person, and I didn't. One of them, I stayed married for 30 years. The next one I dated for about 3 years. The other one I dated for about 2 years. But now I know that I am enough. And so I finally got out of that habit. And I know that voice was an amazing voice that made me put it all together. When I first heard it, I thought, why am I hearing this about my father? And it took me a while to realize that's what it was saying, is that you are enough. You weren't responsible. You're not guilty. Because when you feel guilty, you don't ask enough for yourself. Anyway, that's a long story, but it was very poignant, and it was life-changing.
Wow, what a wonderful, thank you.
Anybody else?
Other folks have examples of I guess you might call breakthroughs in your life where something was not going well or was unpleasant, but then ultimately became a gift.
Yeah.
daughter was rejecting me, and I went through so much pain. And then I figured out that the lesson was that I don't need anybody to love me to feel good about myself. And that I had to love myself whether anybody loves me or not. And that's what I've been learning, learning to love myself and to stop looking for love outside of myself to feel good about myself.
That's powerful. Thank you.
Wow. Anybody else? Any examples, RJ?
What you said in the beginning is what we emit. Is that EMMIT or emit?
Emit.
Yeah,
Emit.
yeah, and I think I have gone through a transformation even in the last 2 years. But before 2 years ago, or even before maybe a year ago, I do believe that I was emitting some negativity, and I had some blind spots. But when we're emitting negativity, we usually don't want to admit it. But conveniently, we start to see it in other people. Like, I'll give a couple of examples. I'll be out in the courtyard at church on a Sunday, and I'll be like, wow, that person was rude. They just walked by me and they didn't say hi. But I wasn't, so I was emitting negativity. But I wanted it to be the other person in the courtyard that was walking by and not saying hi. So it was convenient to say that person's rude, or that person's cold, or that person's ignoring me. And it's always that person. And it took the last year and a half or 2 years to say, well, I'm the one that's being judgmental. I'm the one that's emitting negativity. I'm the one that's emitting judgment. So that was the first example that came to my mind, is when you read that thing about what we emit, we attract.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm seeing cold, ignoring people, I'm a cold, ignoring person. And now, of course, I see all of you as magnificent beings of love and light. And then now I know that I am that too.
Mm.
Thank you, RJ.
Anybody else? Well, I have another one. I mean, the first time this was a good number of years ago, the first time I went to Paris, everybody, friends of the family and the French are so rude, and they hate Americans. And de Gaulle had just, it was that, they hate Americans, and very unpleasant, this, that, and the other. And so I went to Paris, and that's exactly what I found, that extremely rude, and sort of the piece de resistance. It was a warm summer's night, and there's a little island in the Seine, which they think the Paris started, on this island. And you look over on the other side of the river, right near you is Notre Dame, and so you're really in the heart of it. Was a beautiful French restaurant, which is summer, so there's a patio, doors are open, and so we're there. You see the boats going down the river, and moonlight, lovers kissing over on the side, and so it comes dessert time, and I see a gentleman eating this beautiful plate of raspberries and cream, and I walked over, and I said to him, "Parlez anglais, s'il vous plaît?" And he said, "Yes, oui." I said, how do you say this in French? How do you say raspberries in French? He said, "Framboise," but you won't remember that, you stupid American. And at that point, I said, "That's it, I'm out of here." And so literally the next day, we just crossed the English Channel, went to Great Britain. Uh, so fast forward, it's a number of years later, and I had been. It's now the mid '80s, and I've been in Unity for several years, and this thought hits me that I went to Paris with a mindset, and that's exactly what what I saw.
Yeah.
Maybe this time, if I go, and it was work and business and pleasure, I'm going to go with a different mindset. That they're nice, they're this, they're that, and I went there, and that's exactly what I experienced to the point of I went. I'd gone to the Louvre the first time, but I went down to Louvre, and I couldn't find where the entrance because they had just put the IMP designed these glass pyramids where, and you walk through that, and that's under that is the new entrance. And I couldn't find the entrance, and I asked a Frenchman, "Excuse me, I can't find parler anglais. I can't find." And so he said, "Come, I'll show you." And he went out of his way. I really went out of his way to show me where it was. And then a few days later, we were at Versailles outside of Paris, and we stumbled on this incredible country inn, which one of the best, if not the best meal I've ever had. And we had ordered, and then oh my God, between almost every meal, every dish, they would bring out some sort of sherbet or something to clean the throat and all. And then he said, "Oh, we special. We made cassoulet. You have to. Cassoulet is like a bean soup with a lot of fish and meat. It's just really incredible, and just really so nice. And it just really struck me. You went there with a completely different attitude and the experience. Now, I don't say it's 100%. I mean, a lot of times I look at these rules or these principles as sort of like probability, and in quantum mechanics, it's based. It's the probability that the electron is here. That it's probability. I believe, yeah, there probably are times where you're doing everything, following all this stuff, and people are still rude to you or whatever. But there probably is some lesson to be learned. Like the oyster with the sand inside. Uh, but I do believe that the more that we are, our mindset changes in certain ways, that the more that it changes those ways, we increase the probability that we will run into these situations. I can't say it's 100% effective. There are other variables in the universe, but I mean, for example, one of my heroes, Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, which is, I think, translated into Human Beings' Search for Meaning. Interesting how the German changes. But Viktor Frankl wound up in Auschwitz. Was that because of his? He wound up in Auschwitz because his conscience. No, he was a Jewish psychiatrist who in Nazi Germany and wound up in Auschwitz. However, and he said, a lot of times who survived and who didn't survive, it was a random, would seem to be random sometimes. But he said that those people who really had a sense of meaning, and he's defining spirituality very broadly, had that sort of spiritual base, their probability and had felt they had a reason to live through this and come out the other side, that those people tended to have a far higher probability of actually making it. That those who, he said that there were several, like one, he was the second violin of the Berlin Philharmonic, and that was his life, and that's who he was. And the moment that was taken away from him, the moment that was taken away from him, he, just crumpled, as it were. And Viktor Frankl, one, he wanted to live to meet his wife after the end of this, and the two, he felt that of being love and service, and he could use his training and talents to help people. The other is that from this experience came his great classic, Man's Search for Meaning. So, I mean, if you're Jewish in Nazi Germany, you can think whatever thoughts you want, but you have to deal with the collective consciousness of the time. But the again, I think it is probability. The probability that you will go to Paris and you'll go to Disney World and have a good time. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who go to Disney World and their consciousness is so down in the dumps that even in the Magic Kingdom, they're still complaining, and it's still, not going well. So, my experience, yeah, RJ.
Another example. When you were reading about, all things happen can be a springboard for growth.
Yes.
I was thinking earlier today that if I'm coming from a negative point of view, then all things that happen to me are going to traumatize me. Because from my negative point of view, things that happen, I'm a victim and I'm pissed off or I'm upset or I'm traumatized by all the little things that are happening. So if I'm coming from that negative point of view, gosh, the world is going to constantly throw one thing after another. I'll give an example. 2 days ago, I was at Denny's, and I order a burger, and then I say that I would like to get, I said, do you put mayonnaise on your burger? And she's like, oh, I'll bring you a side of mayonnaise. And so she brought out the burger, and the burger had no condiments. There was no ketchup, nothing. And then I guess you just put on your own condiments. Well, she was the only waitress, and it ended up she didn't bring me the mayonnaise, and I couldn't even flag her down because she had like 7 other tables. She had told me earlier, she's like, I'm the only waitress. I've got 7 tables, and there's only 1 cook, and that's all we got today. And I just know that I remember my mind was thinking after like 20 minutes of wanting mayonnaise, I gave up on the mayonnaise, and I did want mayonnaise for my burger. But if I was in a negative frame of mind, I would have just felt like, oh, this is just, I didn't get my mayonnaise and my lunch has been ruined. And I might have just said, well, couldn't these people get their act together? And I'm going to call 1-800-DENNY's and say, you really need to properly staff. And I would have just come up with all the reasons to feel victimized. And because I've been reading this material and other materials like Course in Miracles, I was also thinking a couple of days ago that, wow, who I am today, as I sat there, I'm like a person who's focused on giving love. I'm like, I'm going to give love to the waitress. I'm just going to look around the room and give grace to all these 7 tables. And finally, after like maybe 15 minutes, she was walking by me, and I said, oh, by the way, would you still be able to get some mayonnaise? And she looked at me, and she paused, and she froze up. And then she like blinked as if she was coming out of a trance, and she's like, oh my God, the mayonnaise. Of course, I'll go get you the mayonnaise. And so she, once again, I was polite, just like in Paris. I was polite. She snapped out of her thing, and she was polite. But if I had said, you forgot the mayonnaise, she would have probably said, listen here, buddy. Oh, I've got 7 tables, and I just don't need this. And I don't know how she would have, I don't know what would have happened, but I've been around enough to know, Reverend Rick and all of you, that I know both RJs. I know the RJ pre-Course in Miracles, and I know the RJ after A Course in Miracles. And so I can see both roads before me. Like this book says, am I going to take every situation as an opportunity for awakening and growth? Viktor Frankl's in the concentration camp. And he's like, I'm going to be gracious. He gave his food away. He gave crust of bread away.
Yes.
I'm going to be gracious. So if someone walks by me in the courtyard and they're like self-absorbed or they're angry or they're just not even focusing on me, I'm going to say, bless that person. I don't know what they're going through. It's not about me, RJ. Be gracious, And I feel like I've transformed a lot in the last year in doing these principles and really wanting the rubber to meet the road, where and I call Bill up, and Bill and I talk about ways that we can overcome, what would be the past way of dealing with it, which would be criticism and victim story, criticism and victim story, criticism and victim story. Or can we be gracious here at Spiritual Life Center? Can we be patient? Can we be loving? Can we be kind? And I'm sure Patty appreciates the new RJ, because the RJ a year and a half ago would be, Patty, how come we're not doing it this way? And Patty, how come we're not doing it that way? And all right, I'm complete.
Thank you. I joke.
I just wanted to read something from page 121 that I think is really pertinent to what we've been talking about. Um, so it says, the moment we experience something in life that triggers sensitivity or reaction, the mind automatically tries to change the subject, withdraw as a way of protecting us from uncomfortable feelings. However, there's an alternative. Accepting and embracing the allergen. Right now, you may not have one or more allergies to life situations and people. And when encountered, these allergies take you from a state of ease to a state of dis-ease. If ignored, dis-ease can become the foundation for disease. As in the practice of medical homeopathy, the answer is not avoidance. It is gently embracing the situation or person. And this reminds me of what you just said, RJ. Until you're able to naturally accept its therapeutic value.
Patty, yeah.
I'm going to share two restaurant stories. About 23 years ago, my husband and I met on a blind date with this couple that we went to a 49er game with. And on our way home from the game, we were going to stop in Berkeley or somewhere for dinner. And this couple, they kept talking on the way to the restaurant how they never got good service. They always got terrible service. And I wasn't in Unity then. I came to Spiritual Life Center in 2017. Anyway, I'd had some spirituality before then, but not these principles. So there's that saying, self-fulfilling prophecy. I have never experienced anything like this in my life, and it's going to sound like I'm making this up. My husband and I got a meal, which we were going to share. And, of course, we were going to wait for them to eat. And their meal didn't come. And finally, they said to eat. And we finally did. And the waitress kept saying, your food's on the way, your food's on the way. I kid you not. We were done with our meal. And then the waitress said they forgot to put the order, whatever it was. They got the meal as we were leaving the restaurant to go. I am not joking. It was the most ridiculous. It was the most, if you were going to teach thoughts create our experiences, this example is a true story. We were there 45 minutes to an hour, and they got their food just in time to take it to go. Now, it was just bizarre. Now, talk about what you emit, you receive. My sister and I were at Texas Roadhouse a few years ago. Let me get emotional because my sister just recently passed. And our food didn't come. And the waitress kept apologizing. And Monica and I said, it's not a problem. It's fine. It's not a problem. And she came to the table about 3 times. We were there well over an hour. And I think we got our salad, but not the entree. That's what was missing. And we just kept telling her it was okay. And so at the end of the meal, we got it. The server came over to our table and said, well, we were going to comp you your meal, but do you remember the couple that was sitting over here? We said, yes. And she said, they paid for your meal. And she said, so we're going to give you a gift certificate for 2 free meals at a later date. So the only thing my sister and I could figure out is maybe this couple saw that we were being nice to the server and we weren't upset in any way. And
And then the restaurant still wanted to honor what they were going to do by comping our meal by giving us gift certificates for a future meal. So I think both those stories illustrate what we've been talking about tonight. And if I hadn't witnessed it with Chris and Sharon not getting their food, I wouldn't believe the story I'm telling. You know, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. That was a good
Yes,
story.
yeah, that was a very good story. I didn't mean to jump right in. Um, what we're all saying, I think, is like what they say in quantum physics, that it's the intention of the observer that can change matter from a wave function to a, what was the other one? Particle. And because, of Course in Miracles, I'm starting to really see it's all in my perspective, that it's not, truth is not my opinion or anybody else's opinion. It's just when you keep it neutral and then allow Source to tell you the truth. And I think that's what we're all learning here is that, I don't know, you know what I'm saying.
Thank you. Peg, you were going to say something.
Oh, I just passed, and now I don't remember what I was going to say.
You know, you had picked up on. He talks about colors in the chapter, and we were talking about the colors. Did you anything you
Yes.
wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I think that I had an experience that made me uncomfortable, and it was a negativity on the part of another person towards me, someone who was God, not in the picture, who was who was who was trying to label me as an inadequate parent because I was parenting differently than she was parenting her children. And it was so weird because I had come to the lunch with the intention of having a nice meal, of trying to kind of reach out and bridge a gap between myself and this other person. I even brought her flowers. And what she gave me back was negativity. And that was very, very difficult for me. Very difficult. I did not want to have any contact with her ever again. But it did set me up for practicing forgiveness. So if I guess what I'm trying to say is, in every experience, there's an opportunity if we decide to see it and take it.
Mm.
So I use this as an opportunity to to figure out how to forgive something that was very, very difficult to forgive. And ultimately I did.
Mm. Your microphone.
Either we suffer, and sometimes it's kind of delicious to suffer, especially if we've got a few friends that'll suffer with us. Then it can be kind of delicious. But then it gets painful, and then when we're left alone, it just starts to get, awful. It turns into the awfuls, ain't it awful? And then it gets into the conspiracy theories, and then it gets into the people don't like me, and then it gets into the I hate the world, and then it's a downward spiral. So yeah, anything. Through the years, Peg, I've had a few people. I think maybe we've all had people, and I think we also admit it, and we don't want to admit it, but I think we've all judged others and said you're a horrible parent, or you're a horrible friend, or you're a horrible person because you're a Republican. We've done it to others, and then people have done it to us. In the last 5 years of attending Spiritual Life Center here, I can think of 3 people that think I'm a really awful person, and about 100 people that tolerate me. But anyway, and a few that really like me. So,
When I was in seminary, he actually taught. I took several classes from my biblical courses. I took from him a course on the historical Jesus. I took from him. I did independent study on him with him on modern atheism, going from Marx, Freud, he was a wonderful teacher. Uh, he he was he was an ordained Unity minister, but he was also United Church of Christ. And he made a decision he said, liked Unity, I love Unity, but I'm called more to United Church of Christ. And so he started at one church in Illinois. And I called, it was a while after, and I called him up. I knew what the church was, and he never returned my call. He never returned my call. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, he never really liked me. He liked somebody else in my. He loved Dan Beckett much more than me, and when he left, he recommended Dan Beckett to become the new teacher of Old Testament, New Testament. He didn't recommend me, and really probably does not like me. But then this thought came to me, um, that you don't know that for sure. Until you don't assume the worst, until you have evidence which is going to prove that is the case. Do not, don't, like if you meet him at a conference or something and he's rude to you or something like that, even in that case, go up and ask him, why did you say it? And listen, maybe there's some truth to what he's saying, and it's something. But even if it's not, and it's his side, then then you could say the relationship's over. But don't do that until don't treat him any way different from go to the worst case scenario. A day later, I got a call from him, and he said, Rick, how are you doing? I switched churches. I'm now in, it's the other side of Illinois, and a lot of my old messages were not forwarded to me, and so these were forwarded. And how are you doing? And all that. And I was at Unity Center of Tulsa at the time, and his name's Jeff Parris. I was on the board. I think incredibly beautiful spiritual walk and all that. He pointed this out to me, and at the time I didn't realize. He said, "Notice you changed your consciousness, and the phone call came a day. It came within 24 hours." And so I've tried not to when I start hearing worst case scenarios in my head, to realize you don't don't go for until you have actual concrete facts to back it up. Don't go to the worst case scenario. And the other which I'd share is one of, and I talked about him actually on my trial weekend here, the Laughing Buddha. The laughing, and I so identify, and it's coming up because I realized I didn't have a Laughing Buddha in my office. So I took the Laughing Buddha from home and brought it here, put it in my office here, and ordered another Laughing Buddha from Amazon. And I joke around and call Amazon sometimes the Dark Lord, but God, within less than 2 days, less than 48 hours, they had that Buddha on the little, it's a little thing, but on the front porch package. So anyway, the Laughing Buddha was a monk, a Buddhist monk in China, who everybody thought was, and you see him a lot of it. He has big, round, and you'll see a lot of times in restaurants and Chinese establishments and all that. Prosperity, laughing, and many people thought he was the reincarnation of Buddha. And as a matter of fact, a friend has a T-shirt, and because he's big, Laughing Buddha's big and rotund and all, and so the front of the T-shirt says, I have the body of a god." in the back it says, unfortunately, the God's the laughing Buddha. You know? uh, so, but the laughing Buddha used to look. The story is he would look at people, and he would say, you know, you people, you think I'm so holy and all that. I have the same demons, the same inside of you. Uh, the only difference is I look at them, I look at the demons, and I say, hello, demons. Hello, old friends. I see you, but you're not going to rule my with together with spirit. You're not going to. I'm not going to allow you to rule my life. And uh, what I get from the Laughing Buddha is that because sometimes I think we can whip ourselves that why do I get these mingy, crazy, less than Christ-like thoughts, to put it mildly, and particularly when you're an ordained minister, then you can beat yourself up and say, I'm an ordained minister. I should be so well beyond, so far beyond such pettiness and thought. But I think of the Laughing Buddha and looking in and saying, I see you, demons. I know I know you're there, but I'm not going to let you rule my. You're not going to with spirit. You're not going to rule my life. And then the consciousness can change. So I do believe there are people, obviously enlightened masters and all this, are so far above my pay grade, who have probably gone to a point where they don't get such um, petty and childish thoughts and all that. It still comes there, but I'm finding that there's more uh, of a of a of that witness inside saying, Rick, you know, you don't have to do that. That's not, if you react that way, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not, and not acting on. And if I have done something, I think I'm getting a lot better at saying, being able to make amends and saying, I've made this was I was wrong. So
Yeah, I think it's Rick. It's a wonderful goal, but it certainly isn't easy for
yeah,
us to step back and have that kind of objectivity towards situations or people in the moment. It's for me at least. It's something that if I'm really working at it, I'll probably get it later. But it really is hard to react in the moment when
it,
you're
it
maybe
is when
feeling a little
when
on the defensive.
when you're the sand's like you're the oyster and the sand is really ugh, it's hard to say, well, this will be a pearl. So RJ.
Peg, I do believe that something happened to me yesterday. So it's funny because life is still happening, and every day there's always 3 or 4 things that happen to me, and I know that I've got to pause and be at a decision point. So I was at Rayleigh's yesterday, and I was parking. There was about 100 cars in the parking lot, and whenever I'm in a grocery store parking stall, then I slowly back out, and I look to the left, and I look to the right. So I slowly back out. I look to the left. Everything looks fine. And I look to the right, and suddenly there's this car there. And I'm like, oh. So I go back in, and I pause, and I wait for that car to go out. Then I slowly start to back out. And then all of a sudden I look to the left, and there's another lady pulling out, two away from me, and she wants to pull out. So I pull back in, and she pulls out. And so I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. So then the third time, I'm pulling back out. And then I look to my right, and there's 2 cars, one on the left and one on the right. They're both trying to pull out at the same time. I mean, I've never had this happen. Like 4 cars are trying to navigate and try and get out of there. And I literally did lose my temper. I was by myself, and I'm just like, oh, Jesus, Lord, you know. And that's just don't we all have at least
Yes.
3 or 4 things that happen every day?
Very human, very human. I would be pounding the steering wheel by then if I were you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, RJ, would you lead us in the prayer on the candle? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. No, please.
I just have so many things, so many opportunities to have my buttons triggered in my life. So many. So I'll just share one recent.
Good.
So I was supposed to have, I invited my niece to dinner with me, and I don't get to see her very much. She um, lived with me for about 10 months this past year, and I got to know her, and it was just really a blessing. She's 29. Anyway, I invited her, and ended up that she wasn't going to meet me, but she didn't tell me, so I'm waiting to hear. I heard it from somebody else. And so I wanted to give her the opportunity to, to tell me. And so finally, she didn't. And so I messaged her and I said, so I heard through the grapevine that you're not available for dinner. And she apologized. And the old me it's like, well, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to, because it's like the second time this has happened with her. And and this is all through texting, because this generation, that's how
Right.
they communicate. So anyway, I did send her a follow-up text, and I said, I'm disappointed because I was looking forward to spending time with you, and that's a change from just, it's like cutting the person off, and that's kind of my
Yes.
old MO. Yeah.
Thank you. Great story. Any other?
That's a good growth point that you mentioned, being, you're seeing, you've expanded, and you're seeing more, and you're able to accept more, and be more loving at a time when others might be very disappointed, irritated, and angry.
Mm.
So I affirm you for that.
RJ, do you want to lead us?
So let's prepare to emit. And we can choose to emit love and light, or if we're not there, we can choose to be willing to choose love and light. And or if we're grouchy, we can choose to think about forgiveness. So depending on where we're at, we can make a choice of what sort of energy we want to emit. As a symbolic gesture of willingness, I'm going to ask everyone to slide their chair forward 1 or 2 or 3 inches so we get closer to the light, if you're willing.
I'm willing, but the flesh is weak.
And then we just, we'll spend 2 minutes in devotion towards emitting whatever we choose to emit. And then during the emission process, we will be aware of maybe some messages that the light is returning to us. And so let's begin.
Thank you, Peg. Really enjoyed doing these with you.
Well, thank you, Rick.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you.
Peg. That was awesome.
See you all soon.
Lovely to be with you all tonight. Really enjoyed it. Everyone have a safe and good trip back to your homes, and we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you.
Mm.
Good night.
Would somebody please help Rick? Oh. Yeah, I just want him to be safe.